Hello, students. This is Azan Mirza. We are discussing the topic of heart, the human heart, and the cardiac muscles which make up the heart, and how the human heart is adapted for its functionality. So, the human heart it's made of cardiac muscle. The mammalian heart is made of cardiac muscles, and this is how the cardiac muscles they look like. They have a membrane which is called as a sarcolemma. There are branches of multiple cells. Each cell is having a nucleus. Two adjacent cells have a, you can say, they are joined through an intercalated discs, and there are a lot of stripes which you can see all along. This is the actual cardiac cells. You can see the cardiac tissue here. These are the individual cells. So if I just add the lines here, so this can probably help you see that this is how the actual cells are, and you can see the branching, and you can see the nucleus and the intercalated discs as well. So these are the features of the cardiac muscle. The stripes are there because these are the actual filaments that contract and they allow the muscles to contract. The cell membrane is the region where the you can say that the cell membrane is involved with receiving signals and maintaining that the concentration gradient of the substances do not get altered inside the cell and outside the cell. The general principles that apply to a cell membrane apply here as well. This intercalated disc it allows the signals, the electrical signals, to jump quickly from one cell to another, and then to another, and then to another, so on and so forth, so that the entire cardiac muscle tissue can work in synchrony. So, when we are discussing the human heart, the surface anatomy. So, if you look at the human heart, external view of the human heart is something like this. So, whenever you see this diagram, just first of all mention right atria, right ventricle. This is left ventricle and left atria. You can see that right atria is a bit on the frontal side, and the right ventricle is also towards the front, but left ventricle is tilted towards the side, and you can say left atrium is also like it's almost hidden behind this thing, which is the your pulmonary artery. So let's start with the right atrium. In the right atrium, you can see that this region is the right atrium, and here are the you can see your pulmonary veins which are present just beside these. This is the external anatomy. So you can see the pulmonary veins. They are just peeking from behind this right atria, and here you have the inferior vena cava, which is and then you can have the view of this is the superior vena cava, and the superior vena cava you can see it is joining right into the right atrium, and the inferior vena cava from beside, like from behind, it's also going and joining in the same point here somewhere towards the back, and it joins in the right ventricle, right atrium only. These are the coronary arteries. These fine branches are the coronary arteries. This is the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, there originates a large vessel, and this is the pulmonary artery. One goes to one lung, the other goes to the other lung. Now we have the pulmonary veins, the veins which were peeking from the back. They actually are joining from the back. You can see they don't seem to join anywhere on the surface, so they are joining at the back. So what's at the back? At the back you have the left atrium. So they join in the left atrium, two from one lung and the other two from the other lung. All of them they drain blood into the left atrium here. From the left atrium, you have the left ventricle here, and the left ventricle, like beneath this tissue, you can see the left ventricle is joining to a vessel which is called the aorta. This aorta arc, which is having these branches, it actually is passing right beside these structures. So right beneath this, this is the aorta. So these are the surface features of your external anatomy of the heart. And if you just slice through this heart from here, it was a very tricky question that came once, so you can just probably refer to this question. And this valve here. You can just picture, valve, they prevent backflow. More of this a bit later. So this is your pulmonary valve here, which is present in this region where the pulmonary artery is joined with the right ventricle. So this is how your heart looks like if you just slice through it. If you try to look inside the heart, these are the regions you see. This is the vena cava from the head, the superior vena cava bringing blood to the right atrium. Here you have the vena cava from the lower regions of the body, again bringing blood to the right atrium. From the right atrium, blood enters. You can just follow these black arrows. It shows the blood coming into the right atrium. From here, the blood moves into the right ventricle. This is the right ventricle. And this is the tricuspid valve, which separates the right atrium from the right ventricle. Then the right ventricle allows the blood to go out of the heart through this vessel, and as we discussed just in the previous slide, that this region is your pulmonary artery. So the pulmonary artery will then take the blood, and you can see the arrow that one pulmonary artery will take blood to one of the lungs and the other will take it to the other side of the lungs, or the other side of body where the other lung is present. And this valve here, this valve is a pulmonary valve or the semilunar valve. Semilunar is because of its appearance. It's called pulmonary valve because present in the pulmonary artery. Okay, then what's happening here? The blood has gone to the lungs for oxygenation purpose. Then the blood, once it has been oxygenated, it comes back through the pulmonary vein into this region of the heart. This is the left atrium. So blood enters oxygenated into the left atrium. Just follow the arrows. From the left atrium, blood comes down into the left ventricle. In the left ventricle, the blood stays here. You can see that the left atrium and the left ventricle are separated by a valve, and this valve is called as the bicuspid valve. So the blood that comes here will then go out from the left ventricle through this pathway, and beneath this vessel it is connecting to the aorta, and from the aorta it will be distributed throughout the body. So this valve here, again a semilunar valve, this is called as the aortic valve. So there are total 4 valves in the heart, and you can see 2 are semilunar and 2 are the AV valve. AV valve mean a valve between A and V, atrioventricular valve. So one of the atrioventricular valve is your tricuspid valve, and the other atrioventricular valve is your bicuspid valve. The underside of the AV valve, you can see this thin thread like structure. These are chordae tendineae. These are the chordae tendineae, better, or you can just call them tendons. These tendons are attaching to the inner side of the AV valve and attaching it to the muscle here on the heart, and this muscle is called as the papillary muscle. So you can see the papillary muscle, it is attached to the inner side of the bicuspid valve through the chordae tendineae, and you can see this doing the same thing here as well. So this is something that I already have mentioned to you, that atrioventricular valve are AV valve, they are bicuspid and tricuspid. Bicuspid valve is also called as the mitral valve. All valves of the body, they have 3 flaps except for the bicuspid valves. So this region of the heart, this is your myocardium, this is your muscular layer of the heart, this is where the cardiac muscles are present, and chordae tendineae, as I told you, the tendons are chordae tendineae. And this pulmonary semilunar valve, this valve is very close to the front of the body, right beneath, like it's just beneath your sternum, the breastbone. So you can see this is the actual side, this is the actual you can say a photograph of a mammalian heart. Just look at the thickness of the wall of the ventricle, and you can see this is the entire ventricle. This mound is the papillary muscle, and papillary muscle attaches the chordae tendineae to the underside of the valve. So this fatty kind of thing is, it's actually not fat. This is your valve. These are the flaps of the valve. So the underside of these valves have these chordae tendineae. These are all the thread-like structures. They are very strong. They attach the inner side of the valve to the papillary muscle, and this thing is the papillary muscle. These rounded structures, which themselves are attached to the cardiac muscles or the wall of the ventricle. You can see the same thing happening here as well. So this is how it's present. Now, when we are discussing the cardiac cycle, there are 3 events occurring in the cardiac cycle. We need to understand and follow the term of diastole and systole. Diastole, it refers to the relaxation, and systole, it refers to contraction. Relaxation refers to filling of the chamber, and contraction refers to pumping. The three events that we'll be discussing here are: number 1, the atrial systole, followed by ventricular systole, and the third is ventricular diastole. These are the 3 events which occur in a single cardiac cycle. Now, atrial systole overlaps with the ventricular diastole, ventricular systole overlaps with atrial diastole, and the ventricular diastole, third event, it overlaps with atrial diastole. So if you see, atrial systole means atrial contraction, which occurs together with ventricular diastole, which is ventricular relaxation. Ventricular systole, which means ventricular contraction, occurs simultaneously with atrial diastole, which means atrial relaxation. Ventricular diastole mean ventricle going undergoing relaxation period, undergoes at the same time where atria is also in relaxation diastole. So let's take these on the images, how they look like. These are the three events of the cardiac cycle. This is the first, the second, the third, and then it repeats the first, the second, the third, and so on and so forth. So what's happening here? You can see this is the atria which is contracting. Some of the labels are added here. What I'll do, I'll just add some annotations here to make this more clear. So in the first event, which is the atrial systole or ventricular diastole, at the same time, the AV valves, they are opened, and there is complete silence in the heart. There is blood present here, and the blood just trickles down into the ventricle. You can see the left ventricle fills up with blood, the right ventricle fills up with blood, and the blood is trickling into these from the atria. And as the atria contract, the blood will be pushed into the ventricles. Which valves are open? The AV valves are opened here. These are the AV valves. They are open right now. The semilunar valves, you can see these are closed. These are actually the valves which are present before the heart. So these valves are closed here, and these semilunar valves are closed as well. So the blood stays out of the heart. More blood cannot fill into the atria. So the whatever was present in the atria goes into the ventricles. This is the atrial systole. So when the atria is contracting, ventricle must relax to accommodate the blood so that blood can enter into the ventricles. Now comes the second stage. The AV valves, now they will close down and the semilunar valves will open. Now, and as it happens, you can see that when this happens, blood will strike against, these are the AV valve, the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. When these valves have closed, the blood will strike with these closed valve at a very high pace. So this blood strikes against here and the closed AV valve at a very high force, and the same thing happens here. And the chordae tendineae, which are attached to the papillary muscle and the underside of these valves, they prevent the valve from opening in the wrong directions. The valves, they prevent the backflow of blood. So the blood stays here. The only pathway for the blood to go out is to move into these opened regions which have the open semilunar valves. So as the blood strikes against these closed valves, it strikes against these at a very high pressure or a very high force. It produces a loud sound, which is the lub sound, and the louder sound of the heartbeat which you hear. So the blood goes ahead into these vessels, and at the same time, these valves which initially were closed, these are not the valves of the heart, but of the vessels which are present before the heart. So they open up, and then the blood that was actually present here starts to enter into the atria. So you can say that when the ventricular systole is occurring, meaning ventricles are contracting, atrial diastole occurs. So atria undergoes relaxation while ventricles are contracting. So from the ventricles, blood goes out, and in the atria, the blood fills into both chambers. Now comes the third stage, ventricular diastole occurring at the same time as atrial diastole. So atria was already in diastole, the ventricle will go in diastole as well. So when this happens, what will happen? The semilunar valve, they get closed, the AV valve, they opens up. So this is the blood coming into the atria. As the AV valves have opened up, the blood will go into these ventricles. So I think this went very quickly, so I'll just go through it once again. So you can see here that the blood was here in the right atria and the left atria, and since the AV valves were open, so the blood from here, without any contraction of the atria, the blood trickled down into the ventricle just by the opening of the valve. Here the valve was closed, so the blood stayed within the atria. But as the valve opens up, the blood starts to trickle down into the ventricles. So the right atria releases blood into the right ventricle. The left atria releases the blood into the left ventricle. So the left ventricle and the right ventricle, they fills up with blood. Now when they are filled up with blood, you know that at the same time, the semilunar valve, as I mentioned, they are closed. So these semilunar valves are closed. So when the semilunar valves are closed, the blood is filling here. What happens here? As the blood is filling into these regions, into the ventricles, and the semilunar valve is closed, the blood that went out ahead into these vessels in the previous part, this blood tries to descend back. Since the force of the ventricular contraction is not there anymore, so the blood tries to descend back from the aorta here, and the blood tries to descend back from this pulmonary vein as well. So sorry, from the pulmonary artery here. This is the pulmonary artery, and this is the aorta. So the blood tries to descend back in both, and it strikes against these closed AV valves. sorry, the semilunar valves. So when the blood strikes against these semilunar valves, a faint sound, or you can say a much lesser sound is produced. This is dub. So these are the events which occur in one cardiac cycle. So if we go through them again, you see this diagram once again. This is right atria, right ventricle, left atria, left ventricle. The AV valve was, you can say, the AV valve was opened on both ends, and the semilunar valves are closed. You can see this very clearly now. Here the blood will fill into the both ventricles. So this is the first cycle, first event, the atrial systole. Now comes the ventricular systole. In ventricular systole, you can see the ventricles have contracted, and if you just follow the valves, the blood is going out of the aorta, and the blood is going out of the pulmonary artery as well. So the semilunar valves are closed. The right atria and the left atria, you can see that the valves here are closed as well. These are the AV valves. So these are the AV valves which are closed, bicuspid and tricuspid. So blood in the atria stays within the atria, but the one that was in ventricle, it gets pushed ahead into the aorta and into the pulmonary artery. When the blood is going from here, you hear the loud sound because the blood strikes against this closed tricuspid valve and the closed bicuspid valve, and this is the louder sound lub, as we just discussed previously as well. So I'm just discussing this once again with one more you can say image, so it becomes clear. So then the third stage, you have the diastole occurring once again. So this is the entire heart going in diastole. So when the heart goes in diastole, what happens here? So you have the right atria which was relaxed initially. So the ventricles, the right atria and left atria, they both were relaxed. So the right ventricle and left ventricle, they also undergo relaxation. So when they get relaxed, these AV valves, they open up, blood drains from the atria into the ventricles, and the blood that was in aorta and the pulmonary artery, it's tried to descend into the semilunar valve. It strikes against these, so you get to hear a fainter sound, which is dub. So this is what's happening in the cardiac cycle. You can see that these are the semilunar valve. These are the chordae tendineae holding the underside of the valve, attaching them to the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle themselves are attached to the wall of the heart. You can see these are the three cusps. These are the three cusps, or the three flaps of a semilunar valve. So when the valve opens, the blood can go away, and when the blood try to go back in the reverse direction, these pockets will fill, and then these flaps will just close, and they will prevent the backflow of blood. So moving on, this is some question that probably you can just discuss and try to solve it yourself. Again, the same thing goes for here. Let's come to this graph here. So when we are discussing this graph shows to you on the x-axis time in seconds, on the y-axis you have pressure in kilopascals, the three stages of cardiac cycle: atrial systole, ventricular systole, and diastole, which means atrial and ventricular diastole together, is shown to you. And this is again the second cardiac cycle beginning. This line shows you aorta pressure. So you can see the pressure of aorta. In atrial systole, it goes down. In ventricular systole, after some moments, it starts to rise, it falls down, and during diastole, it goes down once again, and the atrial systole follows. In left ventricle, the pressure, you can see this light gray line. You see that in the atrial systole, the pressure is very low. It gets a bump here because the blood is coming into the left ventricle from the right into the left ventricle from the left atria. So when the blood is coming into the left ventricle, yes, there is a slight raise in pressure, but then as soon as the ventricular systole begins, the pressure increases. So this increase in pressure is because the left ventricle is undergoing contraction. It squeezes the blood, so the pressure gets raised to this value, and this is the point where the blood starts to enter the aorta. So the pressure of aorta starts to rise as well, and this is happening here. And you can see that the blood, as it goes ahead, so the pressure in the ventricle starts to fall down, and you can see that it undergoes diastole. In diastole, the atria is already relaxed, and the ventricles undergo relaxation as well. So if we discuss the pressure in the left atrium now, so this is the left atrium. The black line shows to you that in atrial systole there's a bump. It shows to you this bump is because the pressure in the atria was high because of atrial systole, and then when ventricular systole occurred, the pressure declined, but then gradually it started to rise. Why it started to rise? Because gradually when ventricular systole was occurring, atria was in diastole, and During that diastole, some of the blood they it will start to again fill into the atria, but since there the valve is closed, so blood cannot go out of atria into the ventricle, it stays within the atria. Here the entire heart goes in diastole, the ventricle goes in diastole, the blood goes from the atria into the ventricle, and the cycle just follows. You can see that these are just the annotations that I've added here. This is the simultaneous paths which are occurring together when one phase is occurring. For example, atrial systole is overlapping with ventricular diastole, the atrial diastole and ventricular systole are occurring together, and the AV diastole occurs together. Where is AV valve closed, where semilunar valve opens up, the bicuspid valve it closes here, the semilunar valve it opens here, the semilunar valve close at this point, and the bicuspid valve it just opens here as well. So these are the points in which are worth considering. Okay, so we move on and we discuss the control of the heartbeat. So when we're discussing the control of the heartbeat or the control of the cardiac cycle, we know that the your cardiac cycle, the cardiac cells, they are myogenic in nature. The myogenic means that there are patches of cells in the cardiac muscles that can generate their own electrical rhythm. These include the SA node, which is called as the sinoatrial node. Then there is an AV node called as the atrioventricular node, and SA node and AV node are those patch of cells which are which can generate their own rhythm. And after that you have Purkinje tissue, which is also referred to as Purkinje fibers. So you need to just make sure that you keep these in your mind. So here you have the connections. So where is SC node present? SC node is present inside the right atria, and AV node is also present inside the in the right atria, but it is towards the interatrial septum. Septum is the wall that divides the right atria from the left atria, and this is where the AV node is present. And the Purkinje tissue. Where is the Purkinje tissue located? It is present in the interventricular septum, which means the septum, the wall that separates the left ventricle from the right ventricle. This is where the Purkinje tissue is present, in the ventricular wall. So you have these regions, and at the ventricular region, Purkinje tissue it branches off into right and left branches. So what happens in in cardiac activity? As the pacemaker is working in your heart, you have the natural pacemaker, which is your SN node. This is your natural pacemaker of the heart. It sends the message to the AV node, an electrical message to the AV node. AV node receives the message and spreads the signal, the electrical signal, onto the entire atria within zero point 0.1 second. And from that point, the entire atrial chamber, the right atria and the left atria, they both undergo contraction, which means that atrial systole occur. And since atrial systole is occurring, you already know that ventriculars must be in diastole when atria is in systole. So why atria undergoes in systole and the ventricles stay in diastole? Because the electrical signal is only spreading over the atria and has not reached yet to the ventricles. Now, within this, after 0.1 second, the message from the AV node, after it has spread over the atria, it moves to the Purkinje tissue. After a delay of 0.1 second, it goes to the Purkinje tissue. Purkinje tissue is present in the ventricular wall. When it goes into that region, the ventricles start to undergo contraction, and this is where the ventricular systole occurs. So AV node and SA node, they allowed atrial systole to occur together with ventricular diastole, and after 0.1 second, the ventricular systole occurred since the message has reached into the Purkinje tissue. And when the Purkinje tissue allow the message to spread over the ventricles in the right and left branches, the ventricular systole occur bottom upwards. So when it occurs bottom upwards, the ventricles squeeze out all the blood which is present there, and then there are all these are these electrical connections present within the heart that control the heartbeat. But then there are two nerves; these are not in course. Cardiac accelerator nerve and vagus nerve, these are the two nerves which are the part of your central nervous system. They can increase or decrease the cardiac activity or the heart rate, and they can send signals on SA node to just either increase or decrease the rate at which it is generating the electrical impulse. This you can see here in this diagram. You can just see that this is the SA node present here in the right atria, and then this is the AV node present here, and these are the Purkinje fibers, and the Purkinje fibers are in the septum, and these are the right branches of the Purkinje fibers, and these are the left branches of the Purkinje fibers. And when I talk about bottom upwards, so it squeezes from here, the bottom, and then it goes up. So this is the electrical signal spreading from the SA node to AV node, and then from the AV node to the Purkinje fibers, and this is how the heart contracts. Because of this connection, all four chambers will never contract together, so they take turn while they are contracting. So when the atria are contracting, the ventricles are relaxing. When the ventricles are contracting, the atria are relaxing. It's all because of the arrangement of the SA node and the AV node, which allow the atrial contraction to occur, as well as they ensure a delay of zero point 0.1 seconds, after which the ventricular systole will occur. And since the electrical message have passed on to the ventricles, atria will undergo relaxation, and again the cycle will repeat. So SA node just keeps on firing according to this very rule. So these are just the description of the same. You can get the trace of this on ECG. This is the normal ECG. ECG is electrocardiogram. You place surface electrodes on the chest or on three limbs of the body, and then you can just get a trace. And this is the kind of trace that we get. There is a P wave, a QRS complex, and a T wave. This is the P wave. This is the QRS complex, and this is the T wave. P wave refers to the atrial systole, QRS complex shows the ventricular systole, and T wave shows the diastole of the heart. These are three terms: the fibrillation and tachycardia and bradycardia, which are worth noting if you are if you are interested in the physiology of the heart, and some basic pathogenesis, some very basic terms. So this is the atrial systole, as I told you, and QRS complex is the ventricular systole, and this is ventricular diastole, as we already discussed. Atrial systole when it's occurring, ventricular is in diastole. When ventricular systole is occurring, atria is in diastole. When ventricles are in diastole, atria goes in diastole again. So this PQRST, it represents one cardiac cycle, which means the three events which occur in that one cycle, and then after this very minute delay, another event could take place. So this is how you can see these are the three complete heartbeats, or three complete sets of three events you can see. And this square represents zero point 0.2 seconds. So you can just see how much delay is there, what's the frequency of the peaks here. So you can just work that out if you want. So this is all for now. That's it. Thank you so much.